Grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. Solving the world's problems 12 ounces at a time. It's Dudes and Beer. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to episode 292 of the Dudes and Beer podcast. Chris Jordan, your host here, coming at you from Austin, Texas. Please do not forget the Dudes and Beer podcast is now officially brought to you by podcastcadet.com. If you're a fan of podcasting like I am, want to start up a podcast for yourself, your friends, family, fun, church, school, business, whatever. It's great for businesses, honestly, because it really does set you up as like a voice of an industry, so to speak. So whatever you do, make sure to stop on by podcastcadet.com today. That is the website. Podcast workshops, trainings, consultation, auditing, editing, production services, one-on-one consultation is what we provide over there. Everything from A to Z, soup to nuts. We get you in the door and out monetized, all kinds of good stuff. So stop on by today. Podcastcadet.com is the website. Dudes20 is the code that you want to use to save 20% off your entire cart while you're there. Our guest today is the amazing Professor Richard B Spence. I am so glad to have him on to talk about this most important topic right now. We are all of a few weeks away from what is bound to be our second reality TV presidential election. Get ready, folks. Really, the way it boils down right now, it's kind of strategically looking like it will probably be a recount on either part being called. There is just so much crazy stuff lining up. As of right now, they're talking Hunter Biden stuff, and people are counterpointing like, no, that's all counterintelligence stuff. None of that's real. That's all from Russian trolls. And, well, we had a Steele dossier in the last election that led to a whole cadre of court hearings, led to Senate hearings, led to all kinds of stuff that, hey, that dossier in and of itself was proven to be false, and the court itself, I've got it pulled up right here on screen. The FBI failed to inform the FISA court that that dossier was not reliable whatsoever, and like the FISA court is up above the Supreme Court. Like, you go to them to get warrants to talk to everybody or to listen to everybody. Rather. So the fact that that was the case and that everything hinged on that, and come to find out, nope, not so trustworthy. These are the people that we are supposed to be trusting with the intelligence of our country, the FBI, the CIA, stuff like that. And as I've said before on this program, I would challenge you to find me one. I'm 45 years old this year. I would challenge you to find me one point just within my lifetime where either one has been pulled before Congress or the House for a hearing and not been found later to be lying. It's one of those things like they're spies. That's what they do. What do you expect them to tell the truth all the time? Come on. Like, we pay them to lie and to lie well and to hide it. So when you hear about this kind of stuff, when you start hearing about election tampering, election meddling, that's the reason why I am so happy to be able to have Richard B Spence as a guest on this show. He is a former 30-year professor at University of Idaho, teaching of all things, folks, the history of espionage between the United States and Russia. He is the author of a series of amazing books: Secret Agent 666, Aleister Crowley, British Intelligence and the Occult, Wall Street and the Russian Revolution, 1905 to 1925, as well as Trust No One, The Secret World of Sidney Riley. Welcome to the show. Oh, and also host of the amazing Real History of Secret Societies on the History Channel. Richard B Spence, welcome to the show. How are you today, sir?
Oh, I'm great. I'm glad to be on.
Well, welcome once again. It is always more than a pleasure to have you on. Before we get started, really, I want to make one thing clear, because Richard and I had a conversation before this show, and as my audience knows, I am pretty politically agnostic. I do not swing either party. That's just me. I don't think that, like, voting a straight ticket makes any kind of common sense. One of the things that I really want to get into this evening with you was what we were talking about before the show, where it's how we got to the point that we are, where it's literally, like you were saying, two parties running their own secret club, so to speak, that really decide everything for us. So, yeah. Why don't we go ahead and start with some of that?
Well, how do we end up with two parties?
Yeah.
I mean, you could probably argue that, throughout American political history, there have been a whole slew of minor parties, but you'd be hard pressed to remember any of them. I mean, today there's the Libertarian Party is certainly out there. There was the Peace and Freedom Party. Someone could point out that there are a whole variety of parties. And if they're minor parties, the problem is that they don't generate enough votes to qualify for electoral ballots or to qualify to have their candidates in debates. You have to meet some kind of threshold, which sounds pretty reasonable, but let's face it, that's just a way of keeping out the riffraff. All right, you set up a cost of membership, or you set up a certain arbitrary bound. 2% of the vote, 5%, 10%, and
sure,
that keeps the minor parties at bay. And they can be tolerated because they're absolutely ineffectual. And, I'm not trying to insult, libertarians out there, but you guys know it, don't you? Your party amounts to nothing, right? I mean, other than on, maybe the rare occasion at a local level when the Libertarian Party manages to get somebody elected,
sure,
existence of the party is effectively nil. So what we have in the U.S. is a political cartel. And the only difference between a cartel and a monopoly is that instead of one party or company running the whole show, behemoths essentially agree to divide the market between themselves, which is what we have here. Why it's only two? I mean, I think it goes back in some sense. If you go back to the early history of the American Republic, you basically get a division along the lines of Federalists and Anti-Federalists. You've got people like Alexander Hamilton, who was the arch Federalist, and then you've got someone like James Madison or Thomas Jefferson, who is the Anti-Federalist. And the difference there, really, between Federalists and Anti-Federalists, I think if you summed it up, is that Federalists wanted a larger, a more powerful state. Okay, they wanted a government that did more stuff, and Anti-Federalists wanted it's big government versus small government.
Sure.
I mean, they all wanted a government, but the Federalists essentially were sort of unhappy that the Constitution seemed to restrict what government could do. I mean, it's the same argument. I think if you go back, to the Obama administration, one of the things that Barack Obama said, and I'm not picking on him or praising him, I'm just saying, he wished that in terms of freedoms, people were always thinking about the freedom from what the government could do instead of the freedoms that could be brought along if government powers were increased.
Sure.
And, negative as opposed to positive freedoms. Instead of you can't do this, you can do the other one. So I think that's been the essential argument that goes back and forth. Not really an agreement as to whether or not there should be a government, not a disagreement, rather. Not a disagreement as to whether the government, really ought to be able to make laws and tell people what they can and can't do, but just a relative proportion of power. How powerful, how intrusive should the state be? Should there be limitations on it, or should those be steadily increased? And so, that's led to, the argument that, everything that is not forbidden is allowed. Okay, that was one of the approaches to looking at the Constitution. Well, it says if it doesn't specifically say the government can't do this, then it can. And that actually has been the way of sort of increasing the power. I mean, here's an interesting way to judge it. If you go back to 1789, when the current Constitution came into effect, not the first one, you had three really cabinet positions within the government. You had three portfolios. You had the Department of State, Treasury, and War.
Yep.
That was it. Then in 1798, you added the Navy. Then the Post Office came along. So today, I think you've got, 18? Okay.
Yeah.
So and I'm not arguing that those things aren't necessary in their own right, but the point is that the Republic actually began with just a State Department, a Treasury, and a War Department, defense, foreign relations, and printing money. And we've now added everything to department, transportation, energy, education, veterans affairs, homeland security, the most recent one, interior, justice, and all of that has steadily increased.
Yeah.
So it becomes this big, a large bureaucratic machine, which is really, keep in mind, the government. That's what it is. The government is the bureaucratic apparatus. Okay, that's everything from Social Security to the IRS to the CIA to the military, all of these things, and they run day in and day out. They have appropriated budgets. They have a whole interior chain of. Really, they function perfectly well without political direction. They're not bureaucracy is not politics. Politics can manage and exploit bureaucracy, but bureaucracy is essentially it's the permanent state. Mm. So, when you get people using terms like the deep state, which I don't want to get into, but come back later, that's largely what you're talking about.
Sure.
And because the bureaucratic structure is staffed by people who are, for the most part, long-term public sector employees. And I've heard that from people. There was a fellow I knew reasonably well who said, look, I was he was in different branches of the federal government. He goes, look, I was in this for more than 30 years. And during that period of time, I rose from a relatively low GS position up to one of the highest ones. I advanced through the bureaucratic structure, and I did all of this, and I assumed positions of greater and greater authority within the structure, and I did my job. And I did all of this while in the background, presidential administrations were coming and going, and Congress was a continuous flow of people coming in and out. And the way that I and others around me, he argued, looked at it was that that was just temporary. That was just a kind of background noise. In fact, it was one of the interesting ways he described it, that politics was simply background noise to the day in, day out functioning of the bureaucratic state. And it didn't really matter. And he also noted it didn't really change much from one administration to another. So the idea that there was a new president that came along really made virtually no difference in the way that he did his job. The fact that there were changing that one party took control of the Senate from another one, again, made no particular difference in that. It was this was the government that functioned, that actually did things, that collected taxes, that defended the country, that did a whole variety of factors, and that politics was to them more or less irrelevant. So it comes down to this question in a way that politics, electoral politics in particular, is a kind of, well, some people aren't going to like this. I describe it as a kind of giant dog and pony show. Or think of it this way, reality TV before there was reality TV.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And even and that's why I said, get ready for our next reality TV election, because that's what I exactly said during the last election, was that this was full on, just an episode of a reality TV show. No doubt about it. We had a dude, like, people forget that, Donald Trump was actively a wrestler. Like, he was in the WWE. Like, he was choke slamming people, folks. So if you want to get real, quote, idiocracy about it and get all macho Camacho as president, we got it. We're there. And we're the idiots. Well, like, sadly, and it really is the fact that, and I learned a lot of this stuff years ago, through studying different types of psychology, stuff like that, and just the way that it's really a form of gaslighting, almost making people think that there is a choice. No. If there was a choice, like I said in our pre-show, like I've said in the show numerous times, there would be more types of coffee on the shelf than just Maxwell House and Folgers. That's all we got is Maxwell House and Folgers.
It's here's one of the things that's bugged me for years and years and years. I don't want to turn this into something about what bugs me. Okay. But the constant use of poll, here's a way of manipulating information. One of the things that if you're a political junkie that you will pay attention to are the daily poll results, because there are daily polls, because we have to know this on a daily basis.
Sure.
And if you look back, not just this election, but if you think back over other elections, this is the way it usually goes, certainly over the last, I'd say 20, 30 years. You'll start out, it will come down to a couple of candidates, of course, who've been winnowed down from the only two real parties of the cartel through another sort of dog and pony show called primaries, which are simply sort of partisan internal choices. Okay.
Sure.
So remember, primary elections aren't really those are choices within the political parties themselves, and they're all stage managed by the Democratic National Committee or the Republican National Committee, and you get the result that ultimately they want. It's not the public's choice. I mean, you get the candidates that the two parties eventually decide that you will have your choice to make from. But the polls will continually tell you essentially what the betting odds are. Okay, well, this one's ahead. This, candidate A has now created a lead, and as you get closer to the elections, what usually happens is that it narrows. All right, so you're told, oh, the race is tightening. The race is tightening. It's getting tight. Well, maybe it really is, but on the other hand, if you're writing the script for a reality TV show, that's the way you have to create dramatic tension, don't you?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So, the race is tight. Now, is the race really tightening? Well, how do you really know that? I mean, Who's taking the polls? Where were the polls taken? I've known people who've worked in polling before, and they've generally admitted that it's look, you pick. If you want to sort of skew your result, what you do is that you decide what zip code or what area code you're going to poll in, and you pick the time of day.
Sure.
So, for instance, it used to be that if you picked, you could pick an area that you knew, let's say, was upper income or lower income. So think of it this way. We're going to poll middle-class people, wealthy people, or poor people.
Yep.
And then we're going to poll them what? In the evening when people are home from work, or are we going to poll them in the middle of the day when unemployed people are watching reality TV?
Yeah.
All right? So you can, depending upon the particular socioeconomic demographic of the area you're polling and even the time of day, kind of massage, and you then present. And of course, only a tiny sample of people are polled. I mean, I've almost never been polled, in my opinions. I mean, in the years and years and years, and that's rarely happened. So the point is that it's a sampling, and remember the other argument behind polling is that even a tiny sample, if it's random enough, is representative of the whole. Well, maybe, but do you really know that? I mean, how exactly would you test that other than the result? And then that creates a problem to me. That creates a conflict of interest because you're being told. Absolutely. This is what happens with polls. We're being told ahead of time what the outcome will be.
That's right.
All right. In the same way, basically, right now, so far as I can tell, we're all being told that Joe Biden has opened up a huge lead over Donald Trump and that a landslide Democratic victory is just around the corner.
Just to be expected. To be expected.
Yes. Therefore, what happens is that if you get that result, that's the result you were told you were going to get.
Mm-hmm.
And true, polls don't... That's essentially the way that it works most of the time. You're told this is what's going to happen, and then it happens, so no one is surprised. Clearly everything the poll, but you have no real idea how the poll. You don't even know whether the poll numbers you're being given are legitimate at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. There's just a certain amount of. Look, think of all the things that we just take completely on blind trust. So when you go into, the simplest example is you go into, if you actually went into a polling place and you vote and you put your ballot in the box and you walk away, you never see that again.
Yeah.
And what we believe, what we trust, what we really have to trust in a way is that ballot is going to be then counted fairly along with all of the other ones. But the point is you don't know that. You never see that ballot again.
Exactly.
And it might be counted, it might not be counted. And we don't really like to contemplate the latter part of it because it throws off this whole, I'd argue, which is basically a kind of fantasy as to how things operate.
Mm.
And it's much more comfortable to assume that the whole situation operates fairly, that everyone involved in collecting and collating and counting ballots is completely objective. And I think probably most people are, but not everybody. Why would they be? Yeah. So the whole political system is basically, we don't take it on proof. We take it on faith.
Yep.
So I guess the question is does it deserve the faith that we have? Is our faith correct, or is it a false one?
And that's exactly what I call into question regularly on this show. And not that I do not have faith in the people of this country, not that I do not have faith in the Constitution as it stands as a document. Like the concepts that it took into consideration for the time are even still being debated as a society today. So that tells you the forward-thinking concept that was there. Really, yeah, like you're saying, it all comes down to our faith in that, and has that been proven? And I think, like I said earlier, I've yet to see any time in my life where the CIA or FBI have been called before Congress where they weren't proven to be lying later. So whenever they come out and say, like, oh, this thing's absolute, I have very little faith in that. 90% of the time, whenever they come out and say it.
Well, the thing you generally find, at that level, let's say, within intelligence agencies, is that, remember, they're brokers of information. So
Sure.
the basic reason why you have an intelligence service is that it's to protect your secrets and to acquire other people's secrets. And the general response you might get from someone within, well, I can tell you the response I got from a fellow who was, I was trying to get information out of the British intelligence service. There you go.
Okay.
And I was trying to get some access to files, which they could make available if they wanted to. But again, there is the equivalent of a Freedom of Information Act. I actually think it's called that in the UK. But as here, anything which touches upon national security is generally exempt from that unless they want to make it available. And so I was basically making the argument that I wanted to have access to the material because I'm an historian, and I thought it was historically important. And after all, the stuff I was looking, I was
Sure.
looking for stuff that had happened in the 1920s. So what in God's name could be involved national security for something that happened in 1926? The response I got, a rather polite one,
None of your
but
business.
nonetheless a rather firm one, was that, well, you sort of misconstrue what the whole purpose of our agency is. And the purpose of our agency is that we're not an archival agency. Okay, it was never the purpose of the Secret Intelligence Service to
hold
amass information so that you or other people could later come along and study it. That was never the purpose of it. Okay? We're not there to archive stuff.
Yeah.
The only reason we kept records was because it was significant to either ongoing operations or to future ones. And he goes, that's one of the reasons why we continue. That's one of the reasons why we continually purge records, because they're no longer relevant.
Sure.
And, so and from that standpoint, it made perfect sense. His idea was that, well, you think that we're supposed to hang on to all of this stuff so that you can then later come along and paw through it to find what you want.
Yeah.
Because that was never the reason that information was acquired.
That's right.
It wasn't the reason it was kept as long as it was. And it's just basically us, remember, a branch of the bureaucratic state going about our business, and our business is all about secrets. And frankly, you don't need to know about this.
Yeah, precisely. And what's interesting is that, bringing up that whole need to know concept, like even the president is not on a need to know basis on many things because he's considered a temporary government employee. He's not somebody who's vested for 20 years. He's not like a 5-star general who's been working his whole career for 35 years with the Army, So yeah, there are many things that the president is even not privy. And it was hilarious to me. One of the things that spurred conversation yesterday, or just a day or so ago, it may not have been yesterday, on the Dudes and Beer group was the post, and I want to say I made it from USA Today, regarding the president, I guess, what's the word? Not disavowing QAnon, saying like, oh yeah, QAnon's horrible. He's like, I don't really know a whole lot about it. I know that they're really against pedophilia, but other than that, I don't really know a whole lot. What about this? And the whole headline was literally twisted to like, he didn't say that it was horrible. It's like, he said he didn't really know much about it, so. Like
well, he didn't officially denounce them.
Yes,
strong enough
officially denounce them, exactly. And it's like,
see that the whole purpose of that was to have the group publicly denounced.
Exactly.
And it's that kind of stuff. I mean, it reminds me of something that I wrote once that was going to be presented, and it was actually about the rise of Hitler. Okay, and how Hitler rose.
Sure.
And it was pretty interesting, because I was connecting that to the German army, which just in case anybody's wondering, it's a different topic. Is that it was pretty much the German army that created Hitler, if you want to know.
Yeah.
But the only thing about, there was no question about anything other than the fact that, well, you start out by saying that Hitler was, perceived as one of the most evil figures of the 20th century, but then you don't repeat that enough. So the only thing that was noticed in this is that somehow or another they were counting up how many times I said Hitler was evil, and it's like you have to stop every 5 minutes in this and basically say, oh, and by the way, Hitler was evil.
Yeah.
Just in case somehow you hadn't gotten that, or you hadn't gotten that memo,
or forgotten
that Hitler was evil.
Yeah.
So it was, and I understand that to a way, but the point was it was almost as if what I was actually saying otherwise didn't really matter, but it had to make sure that the standard sort of line in this had to be repeated over and over again, just so that no one could possibly think that, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And just in case anybody's wondering, Hitler is evil. So there we go.
Hitler is evil. Hitler is evil.
Yeah.
I concur, Doctor.
Yeah. I mean, whatever evil is, I suppose that he would conform to that. Certainly made some very terrible decisions.
Yeah, and so, hey, just to caveat that, Time Man of the Year, but evil.
Yeah, okay. Not so much evil then.
Not so much evil when he was Time Man of the Year, but hey, a couple years down the line, really, really evil.
No, here's the thing. You go back to the 1930s. You go back to 1936, and you look at Time, you look at Elsewhere, and you sort of look at American political discourse, and shockingly, you can find that there were all sorts of people many of them respectable political figures who just thought that Hitler was doing great things over there.
Oh, yeah.
But now, no, he was evil. He always had been perceived as being evil. That's the way that it always was.
Yeah.
So there is this constant, well, remember, as I said before, history is based upon very few facts and a huge amount of opinion. And therefore, what you do is there's always a kind of narrative that goes with that. And and that brings us back to, Hitler is, we're sort of kind of getting away from our topic of American politics. But remember, Hitler was elected to office.
That's right.
Or let's put it this way. He gained enough political clout through electoral success at the polls, never gaining a majority of the German vote, but a sufficient point of it, that he became chancellor and then were off to the races.
Yes.
But that he did come to power quite legally under the Weimar Constitution, which was, a fairly normal kind of constitution that you would find for the time. And, his party became the biggest in the Reichstag, essentially in their Congress. And so he was made chancellor in recognition of that, and then hijinks ensued.
Yeah. No, precisely. And I love that turn of phrase. I use that turn of phrase all the time, Doctor. So, yes, absolutely. Hijinks ensued. And that's just it, to go through and look at these things through the lens of history and see it really is just the case of if you don't know your history, it's bound to repeat itself. And that is not to akin our current man in charge to that guy. Because I cannot equivocate the two. I'm sorry, folks. But to start getting back to our real topic this evening, the topic of usurped elections, tinkered with elections. There are two things that I posit on this show all the time. Number one, remove the media from the process. Get it out. And that would be easily done by saying, or by ruling all political ads under the guise of terrorism. You're using fear to motivate political decisions. So no more political ads. That levels the playing field right there. Back to grassroots, knocking on doors. Hey, how you doing? You know about so and so? But when you're talking about tinkered with elections, when you're talking about things like what was the rage for the last 4 years of hearings about, Russian interloping in elections, stuff like that. I kind of laughed at the topic whenever it happened and when it continued to happen, because it's like, how many have we tinkered with? How many have we gone through and played with? And even like you were saying earlier, it really is the fruit of a poison tree. Even what the media does. The fact that the media is now the host of these debates, paid for by a party. So, like, they are hip deep in the bought and paid for game, as far as I'm concerned. Well,
you can go back again. Let's go back and sort of, look at the Constitution. And one of the things that's built into the, constitutional electoral process, and one of the things that's still a subject of debate, is the Electoral College, right?
Sure.
So keep in mind, that's one of those things I think that people have complained about, certainly since so the whole thing in the Electoral College is that, you and I and everybody else, or those who go out and vote, and the common assumption I think many people have is that it all comes down to who gets the most votes, right? Well, it doesn't, okay? So the outcome of a presidential election is not really determined upon popular vote. It's determined upon the electoral votes. And so the whole battle is really to gain popular votes in those areas, in those states that control the electoral votes. And once you cross a certain threshold of electoral votes, then you've won. Whether or not you've actually achieved, of course, remember that was, again, to go back in 2016, that was the result. It was based upon electoral. That's the way it's been.
Right.
The reason why I don't think the Electoral College has been abolished over this time is that it's one of those things that when it works against you, when it doesn't work in favor of your candidate, it's bad. When it does work in favor of your candidate,
it's the best thing
good.
in the world. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's also one of those things that's much more manipulable. So, I mean, here's an example. I live in the state of Idaho, which is that sort of pork chop shaped thing up against, between Montana and Washington. and it's a fairly small state population wise. And I think we've got 2 electoral votes? I don't know, maybe 3 or 4. Yeah. Let's put it this way. It doesn't matter because in essence, if I vote, or if anyone casts a vote for president in Idaho, in the national sense, it doesn't matter because it is meaningless in terms of the Electoral College outcome.
That's right.
But because the time you got down to counting, whatever sort of pittance number of electoral votes that Idaho produces, the decision has already been made by the bigger states like California, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, I dare say. Those are, and this is why you talk about battleground states or battleground distance within those. I mean, really, it comes down to the electoral count in about 10 large states that determines the outcome of the election.
Yep.
So really what that means, when I want to sort of, drive this into the ground and break it off, it means that for much of the country, in the state that I live in, we're just sort of participating in this whole process as a kind of ceremony. It has no impact on the actual outcome.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, is that the way that it was, I mean, I'm not saying that the amount of votes that smaller states could produce, if it was, purely a popularity contest, would make much of a difference as well, but it's not, votes aren't equal, okay? The point is that votes for much of America are essentially meaningless, and only in some areas they have tremendous influence simply because of the electoral clout that they have.
Yeah.
The other thing about the Electoral College, keep in mind, is it exists really for one purpose, and that's to make sure that the unwashed masses don't have too much power.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Because, keep in mind, electors aren't even legally held to voting the way that the popular vote
the constituency voted. Yeah, precisely.
They could change that. They could completely, go in and go in another direction.
Granted, in the lens of history, the argument could fully be made for why the Electoral College was necessary. I mean, good God, there were people fighting skirmishes for a couple years after the Civil War ended because they just didn't get the memo, So when you were talking about the means of communication, the speed of communication, trying to carry forth with a new president and keep those wheels of government moving, I could see back in the day, a couple hundred years ago, why something like the Electoral College, where a few select people who have been selected by your state to vote on your behalf, could be necessary.
Right. And keep in mind, those people were the right people.
The right people.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. They were part of, they were generally better educated. They were, for most of the history, they were overwhelmingly men of property and some education. And, the thing about people with property and some education is that they always tend to see themselves as the center of the universe, don't they?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. And that the rest of the masses were, there's I don't know how many people out there would be familiar with an American writer, I'd say a kind of philosopher, H.L. Mencken.
Okay.
So H.L. Mencken, I guess if you wanted to have any idea as to what sort of philosophy ever influenced me, is H.L. Mencken.
All right.
And I remember reading through a whole list of H.L. Mencken quotes, and I said, okay, well, there's actually somebody else that thinks like me. Not exact, but pretty close. And H.L. Mencken, who I would say had something unpleasant but quite true to say just about everyone. So, for instance, what did he have to say about historians? I think I'm paraphrasing here, but that historians are failed novelists. and That's more true than you want to think. But he made the statement again. I'm going to have to paraphrase. You can find the exact one. I'm going to get it pretty close. He goes, democracy is based upon the pathetic belief that individual ignorance can be collated into collective wisdom.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
And, again, that's not complimentary to anyone. It's not what you want to hear, but I can't honestly say that that's not true.
Hey, I have worked in live events, Doctor, for the better part of my life now. 25 out of my 45 years, I have worked in live events in some way, shape, or form. People up to a group of 25, okay. Beyond that, your potential for mass stupidity, for something really stupid happening for absolutely no reason, exponentially increases for every person beyond 25. Whether it's a club, a venue, a conference, does not matter. Literally, it's literally like the stupid quotient just increases. And it could be a whole bunch of doctors that are in this place, but for some reason, like when the fire alarm goes off, it's utter panic. If there's like 25, 30 people, hey, we just all make our way to the exit. Why can't we just all make our way to an exit whenever there's 2,000? Why do we have to trample over people? Suddenly at that point, panic takes over. There is literally a herd mentality that goes back to like caveman day, that is inside of us. And it's crazy because that is literally such, and we talk about it on the show all the time, the fight or flight instinct. It's one of the most amazing things in the world, because it kept us alive for millennia. That you touch the fire, it's hot. That hurt. Don't do that. Okay. But.
Well, it's a herd mentality in a way. And what do you do with herds? You herd them.
Yeah. Well.
And it's go ahead.
I was going to say, let's start getting into that concept and in the way that intelligence agencies from both sides have used media, even in the way that right now there is let me see if I can get the terminology correct. An Office of Anti-Propaganda is what it is, that was funded in the National Defense Authorization Act before Donald Trump came in. So basically it's like, sure, yeah, we make propaganda, but it's just to cancel propaganda.
Mm-hmm. It's counter propaganda. But if you take that counter off of it, it's still propaganda. Well, there's another one of those sayings from somewhere, is that if there is a system, there is a way to rig the system. And that's one of those things which, I think you can see that for everything from the stock market to politics or whatever you look. If you develop a system, this is what humans build, is that we create these systems, and then there's some way to work it. Okay, that's there's a whole sort of a criminal element in society that spends their whole time trying to work systems in one form or another. So it's, let's go back just for a minute when you were talking about in terms of getting the media out of it and the thing I was talking about, polls. There was, I'm not sure it still exists, but at one point in France, I know here they go, oh, in France they do it this way. Well, they did. In France, At one point there was a law, there may still be one, that says that in an election you cannot publicly publish polls. Okay, there can be within 100 days of the election. So when you get within 100 days of the election, you no longer can. And the reason for that was that polls were essentially being used as propaganda to influence the outcome of the election, because people were being told that this candidate is ahead or this candidate is behind. And the idea being is that if you're continually told that your candidate is going to lose, that then de-incentivizes, why should I show up to vote because I've already been told that they're going to lose? And that doesn't work with everybody. But let's face it, it will work work with some people.
Well, and apparently I've got it up from France 24 right now. French media rules prohibit election coverage over the weekend. So, apparently as of like midnight on Saturday before their election period, media is verboten. They are not even allowed to talk about it on the news. Because, at that point, whether you realize it or not, you are influencing the election. You are influencing somebody's mind, somebody's decision.
Yes, and that's why polls are published. Okay, if it was simply to inform the campaigns, and there's always this difference between people who talk, well, there's the public polls and then there's the internal polls. Well, the internal polls, if you interpret that, are the real ones, or the ones that are more reliable. But somehow or another, those are always kept internal because they may not actually present the picture that you want.
That's right.
So, in that itself, the constant publicizing of polls, the prediction of what the result will be, the sort of horse race. Oh, this one's now, that's what it is. He's ahead by a nose. No, he's falling behind.
Yep.
Here comes Sparky coming up from behind.
Exactly. It's the drama.
Think about that. If you tend to look, whether it's the primaries or elsewhere, that's what you're continually told. The primary elections really are a horse race. Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, think of how many times that Mayor Pete or someone, they're the front runner. Here they come. Oh no, they're falling behind.
Well, and what's hilarious is that it was proven in the last election that the Democrats actively rigged their own primary. Like Debbie Wasserman Schultz lost her job, and then the next thing you know, she's there as a commentator the night of the election, and it's like, what the what? Like,
look, it's a private club. They can rig their own process.
Yeah, no, literally, that was the court decision. Was like, they didn't do anything illegal. It's like, but they rigged their own primary and said that dude won and he didn't, so that dude should technically be running for president, not her. Nope. Perfectly legal, all good.
Or we don't, there's someone ahead we don't want to have, so we'll bring in super delegates. The super guy. Look,
people like Jimmy Carter who now count for like 10,000
a group which is creating the rules for itself as they go along. And the whole point is to get the result that, whoever is running the thing or the dominant faction at the time wants, because you've got internal factions within it who are then backing particular candidates. But, there's nothing democratic about it, with a small d. It's just
that's right.
It's a dog and pony show.
Absolutely. Now that begs and bears the question that is heavy right now, Doc. And I know there's probably about 18 people I went to school with screaming it at their computer and their phones right now, like, Then why did these people rig it so that Donald Trump would be in there? Like if that's the thing and it's a bought and paid for thing, and if a good old boys club, then how come the person who was not the good old boy won the election, and everything else? And I've always posited the entire time that it was literally so that they would no longer have dark horse candidates. The last dark horse candidate you saw debating on a stage was Ross Perot. And he was the last, like, truly independent. He paid for the campaign with his own money, and he was up there on the big stage with the two parties in between them saying his piece. And that was really the last time. And everybody was like, oh man, you can't let those crazy Texans in there. You can't let those crazies in. After that was, like we said earlier, Ralph Nader. That was my first election that I could vote in. And at that point, when I was supporting him in Houston and saw the fact that he was not even allowed in the debate building to get in the stage, that was like, wow, that was my eye opener. And I was easily in my early 20s. So yeah, that was phenomenal to me to see. And my big awakening point, and then to see this now where it's much more, I think, the case of, okay, let's put him in so that from this point forward, it'll just be a lockdown. There won't be people like that allowed to run anymore. If you haven't been like a senator for 20 years, nobody's going to support you as a candidate.
Yeah, if you don't come out of the
good old boys club.
Yes, you could call it, if you don't come from the Freemasonry of politics, which is not an attack on Freemasons.
No, it is not.
Yeah.
Nor to say that this is being done by the Freemasons. No.
But it's the idea of part of a vetted clique. Oh,
most definitely. So it's a cadre of people.
There are a couple of ways of looking at the Trump phenomenon. I mean, one of it is that it's there's a constant effort to influence. I'm not going to use the term rig, but let's put it this way. Politics is way too important to be left to the electorate, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, remember, that's what the Electoral College in the Constitution basically says, is that the mass electorate, that you cannot entrust decisions to them. There has to be a safety valve that will control this process. So from the beginning, it's written into the basic rules that, people cast votes. Those votes are then interpreted through through a system of electors. That's what really matters.
That's right.
So there's always been this an institutional reluctance to put power into the hands of in many ways you said before, it's a herd, and herds can be herded, but the other thing that can happen with herds is that they can stampede. Okay?
Exactly.
They can run over a cliff, or they can trample the chuck wagon.
Yep.
That's what's going to happen.
Yep.
So that's the kind of basic suspicion in that. So the thing is that while there's this constant effort to influence or sort of to control the electoral process, the reason for that is that there's always, as it's seen by, let's say, those who want to control it, there's always this possibility of a chaotic result. You've got this massive herd out there that you're trying to get going, you're trying to keep them going in the same direction.
That's right.
But it's always possible you could lose control. So the thing that I think is maybe the more likely explanation for what would be called the Trump phenomenon is that it was an unexpected stampede. In other words, remember, you're all being told that Hillary Clinton was ahead and that she was going to win. This is what everything was predicted.
Foregone conclusion. It was.
It was going to happen.
Yeah.
And it just didn't. The thing is, it just didn't work out the way that you would hope. That despite all of those efforts, despite everything that was being told, nevertheless, and remember, Trump didn't win in terms of popular vote. He won through the electoral vote.
That's right.
And then you got this result. And then, what do you do then? Well, you spend the next 4 years trying to delegitimize that result in any way that you possibly can. I mean, because it was never supposed to happen, and therefore it will just be negated in some respects.
Our system went awry. How was that possible?
Yeah. So it's one of the things I've noted about, when I talk about the influence of conspiracies in history, which gets into politics, is that people will go, well, if the conspiracies control everything, then, how can anything go wrong? Well, they don't. Most conspiracies fail.
That's right.
All right.
Yeah.
Most conspiracies don't work. Just because really, people who tend to think they're clever aren't really that clever. I mean, you can't control everything.
Well, and as we've said before, the term conspiracy theory I think gets thrown around just as regularly as the term paranormal or UFO in a term kind of like Kleenex. And people forget the fact that there are conspiracies, otherwise people would not be in jail for them. Conspiracies exist, like people conspiring, more than one person getting together for an ultimate end. That is definition of conspiracy, and that, like Bernie Madoff as an example. And people said that he was doing that for years, and people are like, nah, not Bernie Madoff. What are you talking about? Come on, No, he's not hustling people. Lo and behold, he was. And, I've even posited on this show more than once, like one of the longest running conspiracy theories, that the earth was round. You were burned at the stake, Jack. Like, you were excommunicated from the church if you taught people that the earth was round. You got to prove that. It's flat. And that was up until 500 years ago, man. You know?
Yeah, that's the, like, whatever the official doctrine is, whatever the standard narrative, there's a narrative.
So, and
you can find that when anybody, whether it's Galileo or someone else, goes against that narrative.
Yeah.
Well, in the old days, they'd burn you at the stake or threaten you with that.
That's right.
Now you'll come under fire in the media. Okay, the Twitterverse will go off on you.
Yep.
And then you will be, this is the type of thing that I see.
You'll be cancel cultured or something along those lines. You'll be cancel
cultured. What it usually does is that it tries to force people into making a public admission of guilt and apology.
Yeah. Yeah.
And which always reminds to me what that is that if you go back to if you look at something like the Cultural Revolution in China in the 1960s, what you would do is go out and find counter-revolutionaries, or to find unrepentant bourgeoisie, and what would you do? You would essentially harass them into confessing their political sins.
Sure.
And that's and if you look at something like the Moscow Purge trials, the show trials of the late 1930s, the whole thing there.
Oh, absolutely.
It again was a dog and pony show in which the accused would always end by confessing their sins, and by saying, yes, I was horribly, horribly wrong. I was a counter-revolutionary. I was a spy. I was a Trotskyite, and I deserve everything that proletarian justice will inflict upon me. And that's what the whole trial was about. It was to see your enemies confessing their sins, maybe begging for forgiveness, all in the public sphere.
Hey, you press somebody under a board with rocks long enough, they may just say what you want.
Yeah.
The whole Salem witch trials, phantom evidence, and that's what we have to worry about even nowadays. Once again, when you have the media not necessarily doing what the media is supposed to do, trying to get to the bottom of a story, being investigative, asking questions, but rather just following narrative, just pumping headlines, trying to get reads, trying to get clicks, things like that. That's when you have to be concerned.
Well, the thing that everybody should keep in mind is that there's a constant effort. It's not just the Russians meddling. Everyone's meddling with us. All right? Okay.
Exactly.
Because the whole point is that you simply can't allow people to go out and vote their own unwashed consciousnesses. They have to be told what to believe to begin with. They have to be prepared for a result. They have to be, here's another example of this. You've got, in any election, you've got a couple of candidates, and as they're running against each other, what are they doing? They're calling each other's names.
Yeah.
Okay. I should be elected. I, candidate A, deserve to be elected because my opponent, candidate B, is a complete scumbag of a human being. Okay, they've done all of these terrible things. I don't know. Maybe they ought to be locked up, but nevertheless, they're running for this. So you've got to stop the apocalypse by voting for me. Now, let's say that the election then goes through. This should be a familiar scenario, and candidate A, nevertheless, despite your best efforts, you have been defeated, and your opponent, candidate B, has been elected. So the way it was normally supposed to go is that I rally behind, yes, my candidate has won. Everybody should support them. He'll do great. So in other words, the guy who was a menace to civilization the day before now is your worthy opponent that we all need to rally behind. Well, which is true, all right? Where you just, if that's true, then you were just essentially BSing everyone by claiming all of these terrible things about them. Okay, so were you lying then? Are you lying now? or are you lying under both circumstances?
Yeah.
So it's this sort of make-believe quality to it. The only change, particularly if you see in the sort of, Trump phenomenon of the last 4 years and elsewhere, is that even that sort of politeness does seem to have disappeared. I mean, it
Yes.
creates a different attitude in this. You say that, well, yes, my opponent was a menace to civilization, but nonetheless, the people have spoken, so, SOBs that they are, and nevertheless, he's in, so we all have to support that. Or no, I don't accept that. That's not true. Okay, this can't be accepted. This is the result is not what was the correct one. It's completely illegitimate, and therefore we should do nothing but to deny and obstruct as we go forward.
Yeah, precisely, and it really does. Like I said, having studied subliminal psychology, that's normally where I just root to immediately. And whenever I start examining politics, whenever I start looking at it, it's just one of those, like, it really is full-on means of control forever and always. It is what is in the public eye over here, and the full-on political, literal prestidigitation of what's actually going on over here. That magician's trick of distracting your eye with something while this hand is absolutely running the trick behind the scenes. And it's very easy to do in media. Good Lord, there was Operation Mockingbird. We have the files for that in the Dudes and Beer Knowledge Vault. Right, coming up on screen in just a moment, but it really is, scary whenever you start looking at things like that, whenever you start looking at the fact that there are programs like that. There were programs to pump propaganda through the media, to put and even the Smith-Mundt Act was rewritten and retooled a few years ago to allow for the later introduction, like I said, of the Office of Anti-Propaganda under the National Defense Authorization Act. And at the time, whenever it was rewritten, I remember specifically, I want to say it was Justice Scalia that was on TV, like pointing straight at the camera, like, you listen to me, news directors. If anyone from the government comes in and starts telling you what to say, that's illegal. It was like, whoa.
There you go.
But
well, I'm sure there are people out there who remember the Vietnam War.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And, which it later turned out that the whole pretext for intervention was based upon a Gulf of Tonkin incident that really didn't happen the way it was described.
That's right.
But, I remember that, and I remember that, for most of the, much of the media today will take the view that they were instrumental in sort of, bringing the war to an end. And I think once it began to go badly, it was. But I remember very clearly that whether it was Walter Cronkite or whether it was Huntley and Brinkley, that the nightly news tended to be uncritically supportive of that. Okay, no one. There was no mainstream questioning that I can recall that the Gulf of Tonkin incident was faked in order to legitimize a.
Military
it was a lie
presence
that was basically told to legitimize a military intervention when you didn't have an excuse otherwise.
That's right.
And then, need we mention all of those weapons of mass destruction in Iraq?
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where, again, that was just tended to be uncritically accepted and repeated. So,
and it was the same thing in the first Gulf War with the young lady that went before Congress testifying about the babies and incubators and things like that. Once again, like I said, it's one of those dubious things. Like, I'm only 45, doctor. I do not have a lot of years under my belt. I'm hoping for maybe another 45, but it's like, I remember these things, for crying out loud. I remember Iran-Contra. Like, I remember us going and tampering with other people's elections. Like, So it's one of those like, no. It's done regularly. And when you allow the media to sway you, when you allow all of that, then yeah, you are yourself, like we're saying, allowing yourself to be tampered with in that way.
Well, if it's an election, so let's put it this way, governments have, it's the old saying, states don't have friends, they have interests. That's what countries have. So whether it's an election in Britain or France or wherever, I mean, certainly the U.S. government prefers one candidate over another. All right? Why wouldn't you? All right? There's someone that we would like to see elected, so you have to assume that other governments, other political entities in the world would prefer one American candidate over the other. And therefore, while it just becomes to what degree do you want to try to help the candidate that you would prefer get elected? And you could do that by, usually you do that with bags of cash. That's what's been done in the past. So, I mean, here's an interesting historical example. After World War II in Italy was in, well, not too surprisingly, political chaos, because it had the Mussolini's fascist regime had run everything, at least in northern Italy, all the way up until 1945. So there was a big question as to whether or not, a recent question was whether or not Italy was going to remain a monarchy, which it was. And in 1947, there had been a referendum, I think, that had voted a split referendum as to whether it would be a monarchy, and it became a republic. And then you had the fact that the two biggest parties in Italy, in post-war Italy, were the kind of pro-Western, pro-capitalist Christian Democrats, okay? And they always wanted to add that Christian in there because I connected them to the Catholic Church. So the Christian Democrats tended to be, again, a, pro-Western, pro-capitalist, pro-Catholic party. But they weren't a majority by any means. The Christian Democrats could maybe get about 30% of the vote. That was it. The number two party was the Communists. And the Communist Party was very powerful in Italy. So powerful as the number two party that it could potentially become number one. So in 1948, there was what everyone considered to be a critical national parliamentary election in Italy. And if the communists won that, it would assume that that could potentially lead, and this was, a real possibility, to the same sort of transition you saw in Eastern Europe. Except this would be happening in a Western European country, and therefore all the stops were out in trying to influence that election by both sides. So, the Italian Communist Party, the PCI, was supposedly just getting huge satchels of cash that was being brought in through that the Soviets were doing everything they could to back the communists, and the U.S., through the good old CIA, which had just come into being, was doing everything it could do to back the Christian Democrats. And that included lots of money, and of course, to create the electoral propaganda. It also certainly included other less savory things, but nobody wanted to talk openly about those. The cutting edge of what was the American effort to influence the Italian election was, remember, handled by an intelligence agency.
Yeah.
Okay. It wasn't handled through some kind of open propaganda front, but it was handled by an intelligence agency, which really showed you how important, how critical this was. Now, the world was saved, apparently, by the Christian Democrats cobbling together they came out still with about 30% of the vote, but they could cobble together a governing coalition that excluded the communists. And from that point on, really, I think really through the rest of the Italian political history, although the Communist Party, well up through the 1970s and even into the 80s, remained the second most powerful party in Italy, they were consistently, as a general policy, strongly pushed by the U.S. and NATO, was to keep them out of any position in the Italian government. Now, now one could argue, well, that's great, that's good, the commies were kept up. not the point. The point is, it's meddling any way that you want to look at it. It simply sets the template for what happens. And so, yeah, I mean, there's
well, I mean, that was the whole.
There are preferred candidates all along, and sometimes you succeed in your efforts, and sometimes you don't. But everybody is. It only makes common sense that if you have any kind of vested interest in another state, if that country is important to you politically, if it's part of your alliance system, if it's part of your economic system, if it's part of the EU, well, you want the right people in charge. Remember, it's just like the Electoral College. You want the right people in charge, and so you will use whatever means of propaganda or other. I mean, there's always one way ultimately to take a candidate out of the race if you have to.
Well, I mean, there's nothing like a good old polonium handshake.
Yeah, there you go.
Our good friend across the pond is used to the polonium
Vietnam
handshake.
in the 1960s, and the guy who was running the country, No Dinh Diem, who was the head of the anti-communist government. The point was he wasn't very effective at it, and lo and behold, he was assassinated.
Sure. And
who basically, do we now know, organized or was the instigating force behind his assassination? Well, it was the CIA.
Yeah.
So, this guy isn't really, we want to maintain this non-communist government. Jim isn't really doing it. He's not our guy any longer.
Yeah.
And he won't step down. So let's just have him whacked, and then we'll put in a general.
Well,
and then when that general doesn't work out, we'll put in another general and another general. And, that didn't work out either.
That is how Saddam Hussein came into power. And that's just it, following that same policy of regional destabilization and then filling the sucking void, with what you can control. And if you think it hadn't happened, folks, feel free to go check out, where ISIS got their funding. Good Lord, there were pictures of John McCain with ISIS, with the heads of ISIS, because they were the rebellion and the freedom fighters.
Freedom fighters, yeah.
And that was shortly, not too long ago, like 2012, Yeah.
See, today they're freedom fighters. Tomorrow they're head chopping fanatics.
Precisely. And we fund them. We train them. I've held the long joke of sure, we knew there were weapons of mass destruction. You know how? We had the bills of lading. We had the receipts of delivery. That's how. Because if they were there,
in the 80s,
we armed
when
them.
Saddam Hussein was killing lots of Iranians, he was a good guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He was doing God's work.
That's right.
And then that changed. It's.
We say these things coldly, but it really is one of those, once you, like you said in our conversations before, Doctor, once you've been exposed to this and you see it time and time and time and time and time again, you really do become very agnostic looking at these things. You do not have a passionate way, either way politically, other than you realize that there's this truth, right?
Yeah.
That's the only passion I have, is for people to realize this truth that we're talking about.
It's the old concept that if you don't like the bastards that are in office, you can go in and you can vote the bastards out. Can you?
If you've got the money to vote them out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if what you're voting for is simply the other side of the cartel, I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Does that work? Okay.
Yeah.
Have you actually succeeded in doing that?
Yeah. And the analogy I give regularly is, imagine the Democratic and Republican Party as two walls. Do you want to live in a lean-to with just two walls? I'd rather have more walls to my house. That's just me. If I was living somewhere, I'd prefer to have more than two things to prop me up.
What I'm always reminded of is the right Twix and left Twix.
Nothing in between. Nothing in between.
And it's not to
two servings of the exact same thing.
But a lot of the ideological differences between the two parties is mostly window dressing. I'd say that generally you tend to find that in power that things actually are pretty consistent. I mean, this is the interesting thing to look at, would be to look at the different presidential administrations and then try to figure out basically overall in terms of American foreign policy, what actually changed. Yeah. What actually changed.
Sure. Yeah.
And I guess one of the things that you could, if you wanted to look at an example of that, would be something like the U.S. Embargo against Cuba. All right.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to argue whether it's a good idea. I don't want to offend the anti-Castro people out there, but the thing is that since the early 1960s, the U.S. has been waging this kind of economic war against Cuba, which it hasn't worked, has it? Okay, no. Cuba has not gone bankrupt. Okay, Fidel Castro never said, "I give up. I'm not a communist anymore." The Cubans found ways to adapt. The U.S. kept it up, and even though I think Obama sort of lightened the embargo, he did not rescind it.
Yeah.
Trump sort of put it back on, but that was consistent over all of these different regimes.
Sure.
That never. I mean, from the standpoint of the Cubans looking at it as someone else, American policy never changed.
And
no matter what the sort of rhetoric was, whether it was Jimmy Carter or whether it was Ronald Reagan or whether it was Bill Clinton or whether it was Richard Nixon, the same policies just basically went on.
Yes.
And if you look at it, generally that's what happens. Okay, presidential elections do not significantly alter policy that has been long established.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. Even if you go through and look at the jobs of the president, according to the Constitution, he does not have a whole lot there. He really doesn't. I'm actively bringing them up right now. President's job, according to the Constitution, folks. It is in the Dudes and Beer Knowledge Vault. I love this thing because it's full of documents like this. He is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States and of each state's militia when the nation has need of it. He has power to obtain information and opinions from the head of executive departments. May grant pardons and reprieves for crimes against the United States. Make treaties with other countries with the approval of the Senate. Appoints ambassadors, federal judges, heads of executive departments, all subject to the approval of Senate. President also has power to fill any vacancies that may happen while the Senate is in recess. He must report to Congress from time to time about the State of the Union and recommend whatever measures he thinks are necessary. May call members of Congress together on extraordinary occasions, as well as adjourn their meetings when they cannot agree on their own about what to do. Receives foreign ambassadors and other public officials, is responsible for enforcing the nation's laws, and issues commissions to all officers of the United States. That's it. That's it. So he literally has zero power without Congress saying so. Zero. Unless we're in a state of war. At that point, he's Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. And all things route through him. But until that point, he can throw some baller parties without permission. That's what he can do.
The one thing that, you find no mention of in the Constitution are something that's very, very, the real basis of modern presidential power are executive orders.
Executive orders, precisely.
Okay.
Let's get into that for a moment.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go.
Well, executive orders are, really, if you tend to look at recent American history, and I think go back 30, 40 years, what basically we're governed by is certainly on a kind of day-to-day basis or a regular basis isn't legislation enacted by Congress. It tends to be executive orders issued by the president and federal judicial fiats. Okay? So federal courts, including the Supreme Court, rule a particular way. That then becomes... So it's, in essence... I'm not saying it's good, but the courts legislate. They create what is a kind of standard law, or what then becomes law because the court has declared something to be unconstitutional, has decreed that this decision must be made, and then you've got the president issuing executive orders on virtually everything. Now Congress does have as I understand it, as I last looked into it, executive orders are issued Congress then is supposed to review those within 60 days. And if they don't do anything within 60 days, then those executive orders effectively become law.
That's right.
Even
they
though
stand.
They're not actually law. They're just administrative orders. So the use of governance through executive orders can only exist because Congress doesn't do its job and allows that to go through. But what you do get, they simply act by not acting. But that's pretty much what I remember someone that President Trump had issued a decree, which meant now at least they're calling them decrees.
Sure.
And the question was that just sort of popped into my head: since when are we governed by decrees?
Yes.
Well, for a long time, actually, except they're called executive orders. And so it's I don't think it's you can get this whole, what it was that the founding fathers or the framers envisioned. Well, it wasn't this.
No.
This.
No, this is far. I mean, they didn't even consider the majority of them did not even consider that senators should be paid.
No.
Let's just put it that way. So yeah, it's a far cry from what was laid out in the Federalist Papers, things like that. Most definitely. And like you were just saying a minute ago, to go back and to start looking, even the CIA, the way that they meddled in Italy, the way that they meddled in Argentina, Cuba, it's rife. It's over. And even right now, I would venture to say, down in Venezuela and stuff like that, where everything is going on. Like the crazy guys that were just caught with a plane full of weapons and a C-130 flying over there. It's like, wow, that sounds awfully familiar. I wonder where they picked up that MO. Maybe Operation Phoenix, before into Cambodia, before the whole Gulf of Tonkin, perhaps the Iran-Contra affair, before we went out and ousted, Noriega in Panama. Like it's rife over and over and over again. So like I was saying, for me to hear election meddling is just for me to laugh, literally.
Yeah, I mean,
like
meddling covers such a wide range of possibilities.
Sure.
So, I mean, all it really means is, I would have people who would come up and think, oh, yeah, the Russian meddling. And I go, well, meddling how? What exactly did they do?
Yeah.
Okay. I want you to show me show me where a vote was changed. Show me how the Russians hacked a voting machine in Ohio.
Exactly.
Well, it's not that. It's that they were influencing.
They were social hacking.
Well, isn't that what politics is all about? Is influencing? I mean, that's what ads and everything else are doing. They're trying to sway people. They're trying to herd people in one direction or another. So considering why is that surprising? I mean, why would you assume
that they wouldn't?
I mean, again,
why would you assume they wouldn't?
Relatively important, and it is important, the position of president of the United States is. And then would you seriously believe that other countries, not just the Russians or the Chinese, keep in mind other countries who have vested interests, the British, all of our so-called allies, every single one of them, even our unofficial allies like Israel, all of them have a look at it this way. I mean, economically and militarily, Israel, is going to live or die on American support. It's critically important. I would venture a guess,
Professor, that literally any country listed on the document that I have from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals declaring the PRISM program utterly illegal. Any country that had an ambassador who had data that was swathed by the PRISM program, they have a vested interest. And that is every single country on the planet.
Yes.
Every single one.
They will. Why wouldn't they? I mean, if you were in their position, if you could, wouldn't you help along the candidate that you would like to have? Yes, of course you would.
The one that's going to unembargo trade to your country or do whatever. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you were the CEO of a company and you could get a favorable person on the board, would you not?
It's even the assumption that
it's fully illegal, but it happens every day.
Yes, that doesn't stop it from happening. If the Russians had a reason to meddle in the election of 2016, they've had a reason to meddle in every single presidential election.
Precisely.
From the beginning of time. Certainly since 1920, they have been doing it
since the Franco-Prussian War, at least.
Yeah. So again, why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
It's to their interest to see that will be done in the same way that the U.S. routine. Look, the U.S. has made it pretty clear that it would like to have somebody other than Vladimir Putin in control of the country, and we haven't been able to get any kind of really viable candidate. But nonetheless, we continue to try. And again, why wouldn't you? So, I mean, that's just the basic game. There's nothing exceptional in this. Everyone is trying to influence and meddle in other people's elections because of the different economic and political factors that are involved in it, which, again, are one of those things that it doesn't really matter how that herd is going to vote. It just matters in which way you can herd them.
Yeah, and it doesn't much like any group of scared animals. It does not take a lot. It really doesn't. It really doesn't.
Well, here's another little thing which is often overlooked. Not a little thing, it's a big thing, is that you don't even have to herd the entire herd.
Nope.
If you go back, if you look at the presidential election of 2016, about 55% of the electorate actually cast ballots. So in other words, about half the people who could have voted didn't vote, which meant that really all you have to do is to deal with that 55% who did, which means that, I mean, here's the basic reality. If you go back, I mean, if you look through most of the latter part of the 20th century, rarely does much more than about 60% of the electorate participate.
Yeah.
Which means, considering that the vote then for president is pretty much evenly split between the two. I mean, let's put it this way. We don't get results that are like 90% versus 10%. We tend to get results that are, if somebody gets 55% of the vote, we call it a landslide, right?
Exactly.
Even though it's barely more than half. So this is what you actually need to get someone elected president of the United States. You do not have to have them elected by a majority of the electorate. All you have to do is to get them elected by a bare majority, and the electoral votes that hopefully will follow by about a third. All right. So if 60% of the electorate participates and your candidate wins, then they've essentially gotten about a third of the vote. And what that means, or even less, I mean, I think in the election of 1996, only 49% of the electorate participated.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton was reelected, but he was effectively reelected with, about 25% of the electorate. So in every presidential election, the victorious candidate has only won or you think of it this way, that for every person who actually voted for them, 2 or 3 others voted against them or did not vote for them.
Yep.
So no one is a majority candidate. No president in modern history has ever actually come into office supported by a majority of the electorate. They are a minority candidate from day one.
Precisely.
Yet somehow we don't notice that.
Yeah, no, it is a fact that really and regularly skips people's minds, something that they really do not consider. It's kind of frightening sometimes to me, the fact that, and I am not a fearmonger, folks, but to me, one of the most frightening things is, number one, people are convinced that we live in a democracy. No, we live in a republic. Remember that. The more you are convinced that you live in a democracy, the more you're falling into this trap, folks, because democracy is a type of voting. It is not a form of government. So the more they convince you that democracy is your form of government, the more you buy into this system of bipartisanship that exists right here. So you need to reclaim the fact that you hold the power, not them. If they aren't for term limits on themselves, vote them out. If they aren't for losing their own congressional salary and pension, vote them out. Seriously, like, that's where the power lies. You could, like the good doctor is saying, fall into the trap of believing that there is a majority candidate that's winning the presidency. That is statistically not the case at all. At all. If you wanted to make it the case, you would make voting day a national holiday, no work allowed, everybody's paid vacation. That would make it equal. That would make it right. And I guarantee you'd see a totally different level of people at the polls. You'd see a totally different number of people at the polls. If you made it on a Saturday, like you're saying, Doctor, a lot more people would be able to make it because they are not working two jobs. They aren't out going to school, things like that. Like you don't, I don't know. Did they do it at University of Idaho where you got the day off school for November 3rd for election day?
No.
Yeah. No. You taught there 30 years, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And that's
34, 34 actually, if you count it up.
That's like, not to disparage the university, folks. I'm just stating a fact.
We could. There's a whole other conversation about university politics.
Well, but, yeah, but I mean,
you're getting Kafkaesque when you get into that.
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is, you're hard pressed to find an employer that will give you the day off with pay for jury duty, and that is literally like ground level where you can make a difference in your country is jury duty. And yet still it's one of those that everybody tries to get out of. I know people, and so much so, where jury duty and voting disparagingly put together that they have been separated now, and your jury summons comes off of your driver's license renewal, no longer off of your voter's registration, folks. So if you think you're getting out a jury duty call by not registering to vote, that is not the case. But that's another one of those that people convince themselves that, like, oh man, I don't want to do that. But it's like, you realize that is where you actively have the chance to change precedent of law. You, the citizen, at that point, get to sit on a jury and hear a case that may have never been brought before a court before. And when that happens and you sit on that jury and you have something to do with that decision, you have just helped write law. As an ordinary citizen.
Precedent. There you go.
And that's the most beautiful thing in the world. You have helped do that as an ordinary citizen beyond the means of vote. So that is where you can go take active part, and where it does make it. And we can have a whole episode about the disparages of the court system in America and how that's bought and paid for in and of itself.
Well, but you can get into I think a statistic I heard was that 95% of cases are settled by plea bargain.
Yeah.
Only 5% of cases that could go to trial go to trial.
Yeah.
And the basic reason for that, as I've had some lawyer friends explain to me, is that, well, juries are unpredictable.
Yep.
Whether you're the prosecutor or whether you're the defense attorney in this case, the thing is that juries are just unpredictable. They're like voters if you just let them on their own. It's much easier to get a result which satisfies, which is some sort of result that, gets VA a conviction, gets a relatively light sentence, we'll settle it by a plea bargain. All right?
Yeah.
And generally what a plea bargain means is that you plead guilty to something, which means that, see, you did something wrong. There's going to be some kind of punishment assigned. Whether it's a greater or lesser a punishment isn't really going to matter. That probably depends upon how good of a lawyer it has and the kind of plea bargain you can get, or more than likely how many other people you're willing to rat out. But because that's often what the plea bargain is based upon, is that if you turn state's evidence, then you'll get a lighter sentence.
Yeah.
But that's really the way that it works. Going before it's a rare occasion in criminal cases where someone actually ends up in front of a jury. That's basically settled by a couple of lawyers sitting in a room working out that this is what I want for my client. Well, this is what we'll offer. And so we'd like to have 10 years, but we'll go with 5 and 3 offer probation. Okay, there
it's
you go.
Major capital cases. It's things like that end up going before a jury. And it's just one of those, like we're saying, there's just a great misconception, kind of like the misconception where people think like, oh, I was arrested and they didn't read me my rights. No, then you weren't arrested. You were detained, my friend, which they are allowed to do for up to 48 hours without any legal cause. So, yeah, you were detained, not arrested. That's why you were arraigned in front of the judge when he read you your rights.
Well, it's the most basic thing that any attorney, even a cop, I think, would tell you that if you find yourself facing arrest, what's the one thing you're supposed to do?
Shut up.
Shut up.
Shut up.
Don't just say, I'm not talking about anything. And the simplest action is that, I don't want to answer any questions and either arrest me or let me go.
Yeah, no, that is literally my favorite video that has won the internet for me over 2020. One of my listeners put it on the Dudes and Beer group because we have a very good friend of mine from high school, J.L. Carpenter, who's a listener of this show. She supports this show. She comes on the show regularly to talk about legal issues facing us, things like that, civil rights issues, that kind of thing. That was literally the video, was this guy getting pulled over by the police, and he's like, you know why I pulled you over? I don't answer questions, sir. That is the only thing this gentleman answered with, was, I don't answer questions, sir. I don't answer questions, sir. Just repeatedly, and eventually the police officer let him go. It was like, wow. And even myself, like I was arrested years ago, and had I known my rights the way I know them now, it would have never happened. So it really is the fact of we have such a short span of history mentally. Not everybody remembers things 10, 12, 13 years in the background that happened on spurious things, that kind of stuff. And I think that is our detriment, the fact that we have become this media hungry society, this chase the headlines society. Mm-hmm. And I think that is kind of lost our investigative spirit as people to begin with, lost our realm of curiosity and digging ourselves and forming our own opinion through reading things.
Well, I think that's the important thing there, is you got to think for yourself, because if you leave it to the media to tell you what to think, if you leave it to me to tell you what to think, and I'm not trying to do that. I feel that I'm just kind of pointing out what to me seems to be relatively obvious, and if it's not obvious to you, then prove me wrong. A word for anything. But you should think about these things. And the thing to keep aware of here is that you are constantly being manipulated.
Yes.
Right? And the simplest way to look at that is just through advertising. I mean, here's one way. Do you really believe anything that you see in ads? I mean, do you take them as being, no, I mean, I think we all accept that, advertising is based upon an effort to sell us a particular product. And so the product will always be presented as being in the most favorable light. That it causes cancer probably won't be pointed out for another 20 years, but nevertheless. So we don't, we know that advertisers on a certain level are giving us selective information to get us to buy their product, which really means that they're lying to us on a certain level. But the thing is, that works in politics. Why wouldn't it work in politics? Why wouldn't it work elsewhere? And I think you simply have to accept that we live in an environment of a constant manipulation of information, and the way to deal with that is to be informed and to be skeptical. All right? And to always give it the kind of acid test. Does this make sense? Okay, does this really make sense on its own? Leaving all of the things aside, is there something that doesn't quite make sense about this? There's something that smells about it. I mean, there is no better defense. The only defense you have is your common sense and discernment, and to increase that, you need to pay attention. You need to learn things that are going on. Study of the past can be important because it's just the repetition of one theme after another. And really, if you don't do that, then you're just waiting to be herded around.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like that sounds utterly Machiavellian, I hate saying that, but, that is the harsh pull the Band-Aid off reality. Like if you aren't willing, and even whenever I taught religion to junior high and high school students for about 10 years of my life. And that is how even the kids that had me in 7th grade and 11th grade got the same talk at the end of each year. The last class I opened up with, everything I taught you this year may have been a lie. Go find out. Go question it. Be willing to question it. It's okay. If you find out I'm wrong, please come tell me. Let me know. I'm okay with being wrong. But you have to literally go and find out. You can't just sit in a class. You can't just read a book and take it at that. There's a reason why there's footnotes. There's a reason why there's a bibliography that shows you sources, so that you can go back and check those sources and see it for yourself, and for me, that's a big tell right there. Whenever I read a news article and there's not a link somewhere to like a scribd document or something like that, like if there's not a link to a source or a source cited, unless it's some deep intelligence release, I just do not bite. That's just me. I'm looking for footnotes and bibliography. 'Cause if I didn't provide them, I was like at best a C student. And guess what, Doc? I was at best a C student. Mainly because I was not in class. Not that I didn't read the book. I just wasn't in class. I was out drinking. I'm not going to lie. Show it and called what it is for nothing. But yeah, it's to me kind of frightening that, yes, people are willing to fully take things prima facie. They are fully willing to accept what is given to them on the 6 o'clock news, and exactly what is given to them in the 9 o'clock segment that they are told to stay tuned for after Frasier. It really is just that easy, and it's kind of frightening sometimes to see the myopic view that so many people take on both sides of the fence. And I mean, I have it represented on both sides in my family, and I just kind of sit there and like, it's like watching a ping pong match, just sitting in the middle going, you're both hilarious, right? That like you're even buying, that either one of you are even buying into this from either direction. Is hilarious to me.
I try to find it funny. If people generally get into a political conversation, I'll just leave the room.
Yeah.
Because the thing that will happen is that, being the spoiled sport that I am, is that I'm generally not going to take one side over the other. I'll start pointing out the
failures of both
truths that we've just been doing here, and then that just manages to piss both of them off.
We need to go out bowling, Doctor.
I haven't been bowling in years.
Because I am very much the same way whenever I go to a party and it's brought up. Like I can't be around a political discussion because that's what I do, is just go, hey, look at both of your bubbles. Pop.
It's like telling people there's no Santa Claus.
Well, really. I mean, hey, man.
It's the adult equivalent of doing that.
I love my kid, but he'll find out. It's kind of like I told my mom, who, God bless her, I love my mom so much. And this is not even political, folks. This had to do with when coronavirus came around. And, she was talking about some kids that missed out on their graduation. And I was like, okay, it wasn't that long ago that I graduated, like half my life ago, sure. But I remember it vividly. And you were much more excited about that than I was. Like, I was excited to move on to the seminary and go to college, things like that. But it was not the, like, stand up in the bleachers, scream at the top of my lungs for joy day of my life. That was your day, Mom. So I think you're viewing this through the wrong lens. I think most of the seniors really don't care if they have to sit out in the heat amongst 500 of their friends and wait for somebody to walk across the stage.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's affecting any of them the way it's affecting you.
Well, I mean, here's an interesting question. I mean, how many people out there who ever basically, been part of a graduating class have sat there and wasn't just waiting for the whole damn thing to get
to be over with? Yeah, right. Like, hey, I wanted to party, I went and saw my family, but those things are much more about the family than it is about me. Like, that party was about you and your congratulations for getting your kid through high school, man. Like, yes, I got the presents, but the congratulation was for you. You had the real accomplishment. You're the one that reared a kid enough to get him through high school.
We just had to endure it. No, I mean, personally, I would try to avoid graduations as much as possible, and they were an ordeal. You endured it. Okay, yeah. I'm going to sit here, and how many more names? What are they up to? Are they up to the H's? Okay.
You do get to wear that cool hat.
If your last name begins with S, you're going to be there for a while.
You do get to wear that cool hat. It's pretty good.
Well, at university graduations, just since I've been able to put this in, they want faculty to show up. You actually have purpose there other than and you're supposed to put on your regalia, which are those kind of, imitation medieval costumes that nobody ever actually wears, but you're supposed to buy and have handy. Yeah. And then you all go and you sit in a part of and you just sit there. I mean, you're not even walking across the stage. You're just basically there as window dressing.
The song they play isn't called Pop and Circumstance for nothing.
Yes, and I certainly went to my fair share of those, but at some point I just decided, okay, I've done this enough.
Yeah.
And I'm not. It was
enough.
It was voluntary at that point, but I just said, okay, I've done enough of these. That's it. So there you go.
Well, and like we're saying, after years of seeing it, like you've said before on the show, nothing surprises you. There is nothing that happens that you can't go, oh yeah, I could believe that. And I'm very much the same way. That's why I call them hypotheses, not theories. They are something that we have to poke holes in and prove, folks. It's okay to hypothesize. It's okay to hypothesize. You're supposed to. That means that you are doubting something. That means that you are calling something into question. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. So I hold no fear in postulating, hypothesizing, putting things out there because, hey, if it's wrong, all right, cool. You know how many things they were trying to figure out before they actively figured out gravity? You know, how many people took a stab at that?
It's the basis of science, okay? You collect some facts and you build a hypothesis based upon that, and then hopefully you are able to test the hypothesis, and it either holds up or it doesn't, in which you go back and you try to formulate another one. I mean, that's the only way you get anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's one of these things in the argument which is sometimes made is that, well, you should never speculate. You know, you should never speculate on anything.
Untrue.
And, well, you have to.
Yeah.
All right. Because unless, if you've got a certain information that, it's like trying to figure out which way to go. Okay. Do I go to this path or do I take that path? I'm not really sure which one is correct. So I've got to collect whatever kind of evidence I have. And then I've got to speculate that that's the right way. And hopefully it will be. But unless you're willing to do that, unless you're willing to sort of go beyond the sort of immediate limited facts you have at hand and try to figure that out, you're never going to move anywhere. You're going to be standing at that junction forever because you cannot risk going on speculating which of those avenues is going to be correct.
Yeah.
So but you have to keep those two things. You just have to admit when you're speculating, which is the problem.
Sure.
And that the hypothesis also does not then become fact.
That's right.
The reason that someone has said it is the case. It's simply it's a narrative. It's a way to explain things.
Yeah, it's just a thought form, nothing more. And not one that I'm attached to. You know, it's not like a song that I wrote where maybe I'll take it personally. You know, I've been wrong before in life. I'm willing to be wrong again. I hope I'm wrong numerous times. I hope my son proves me wrong a ton. You know, without that, I'm not growing. If I'm not questioning, I'm not growing. If I'm not hypothesizing and postulating other possibilities of the universe and its existence and why, that's on me. That's my fault if I'm not doing that. And I become stagnant in my thought form. And I guess it's kind of I wouldn't say I am a Stoic because I'm nowhere near that dispassionate. But I think what's really missing in all of this, whether you're talking politics, science, doesn't matter, is that dispassionate belief, Doctor. That fact of willing to take data as data, dispassionately process it, and be willing to accept it. And I think it's that dispassionate part that we've kind of lost track of, whether it's science being unyielding and saying, no, this can't happen. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of science now saying that it can, you know. So. Well,
it's in some ways you can kind of fall in love with your own narrative. You know,
sure.
You develop a theory about something and you become so enamored of that theory that then everything becomes focused upon trying to maintain it against any other challenges to it. And,
sure.
You know, once you do that, you fall into the trap of
false
excluding
positives.
Any information that then goes against the theory. And that's a thing you have to constantly watch yourself on.
That's right.
And it's and I try to do that in things that you know, in my writing. You know, there may be a particular answer to a question that I think is correct, but what I have to watch myself on is this an answer to the question that I just don't think, you know, kind of objectively is correct. Is it one that I really sort of like? Do I want this to be true?
Yeah.
And once you sort of want it, you know, once again you kind of fall in like with it or in love with it, then that's where you've got to be careful.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that, you know, I can't say that I've always avoided it in every case, but I'm certainly aware of it, and I try to check that.
Yeah. Same.
As much as possible. You know, I'd really kind of like to have this, but, you know, just let the thing reveal itself. I suppose that's
let the evidence go where it takes you. You know,
here's an interesting thing that I found is that one of the things you deal with if you're dealing with an historical event is that you're already dealing with the narrative that's been created about that event.
Sure.
Or you're dealing with the contending narratives about it.
Yeah.
So what I would often find I was doing is that I was kind of following. I'll give you a specific example. One of the books I wrote was about this fellow who's probably best known as a spy, although that hardly does him justice, Sidney Riley. All right, complicated guy, pathological liar in many, and anything he ever said about himself was untrue to one degree or another.
Oh, like a spy.
But there was a narrative about him. All right. So I'm trying to work on a biography about him and incorporate all this material that I had come up, which was beyond what had been written about before. But what I'm trying to do is that I found that what I was doing is that I was sort of accepting the basic narrative, the basic story about him that he'd written as essentially correct. And then I was trying to fit the information that I had into it. The problem was it didn't fit that well. But because I was dealing with that narrative, it's like you've got a script, and then you have to adapt your information to the script. Well, here was a simple thing that I found. Okay, let's try this differently. Let's simply ignore the previous narrative. Let's leave that out. Let's shut off the voice which is telling you what happened, and just look at what happened. In other words, it's the old thing, don't pay attention to what people say, pay attention to what they do. And what I did was to simply put the standard narrative aside. Let's kind of try to forget about that, and then let's just look at what he did. Let's just look at the flow of events. And then if you didn't have that, if you ignored the existing narrative, what story, what seems to be the pattern emerging there, which is completely different. And that, in some ways, was the key, which I'd say I've actually found out much of that since I wrote the books and in the ongoing research, is that was what then you found made sense, was that the existing narrative was fundamentally flawed. It was trying to turn him into something that he was not. And if you just turned off the sound, so to speak, and you watched what was happening, it was actually fairly obvious.
Yeah, and that's very much kind of the case like you were putting forth in Secret Agent 666 as well. The fact of what we publicly know about Crowley is one thing. The public face of things of the Ordo Templi Orientis, his church, everything else was one public face, but the things going on behind closed doors were something totally different. And the relations that he had, even though at one point there is a person, Alvanson, is that his name? Where it's like the connections to him are there, but there's no like proof that they had any actual dealings between them.
Oh, you're talking about Hannessen, the German psychic, in the early when Crowley's in Berlin in the early 30s, and when by all factors he certainly knew Hannessen existed, since Hannessen was like the big ticket in Berlin at that time. You couldn't miss him. Yeah. And he was the type of person that Crowley would have keenly taken an interest in because of the whole occult aspect of it, and yet there's no evidence that he did. And that's one of those things that's kind of interesting, because it becomes almost conspicuous by its absence. And I mean, that's one of the things that you can say. It gets a bit tricky, but it's one of the things you're looking for things that should be there. But then you should always pay attention, is that when something is missing that should be there.
Yes. Especially when
there should be some kind of record about this. It certainly, they would have merited some kind of mention, but there's no mention. And I simply, I can't, putting everything aside, that does not compute in the sense that Crowley would not have paid any attention to it. So why is he, in essence, avoiding the subject? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's always interesting to me. But like we were saying earlier, even the fact of not calling out QAnon, like it's how the headlines roll. It's the way that they're done. It's the way that they're twisted. It's the way that they put their fingers in the pie as well. Much like the public face that's given by Aleister Crowley, as well as the background history behind him. So you really do have to be willing to dig deeper. You have to be willing to get a little mucky, and you may find some things that you don't like. You meant like, I love my country, doctor. I love my country beyond all belief. Am I proud of my country? No. Like as a person, as a man, I'm not, because of the atrocities I know that we have committed, not only abroad, but amongst our own people here in this country. Through the means of media, through the means of science, through the means of military, and even just through the means of maintaining a doctrine of fear. it comes from so many aspects, but as much as I love my country, I can never say I'm hugely proud because we never really want to own these things that we do, you know? We never really just want to proudly say, like, yeah, dude, check it out. We jacked up Argentina. Way to go. Go USA.
Well, it's, you know, you're born where you're born and you are what you are.
Sure.
There's no getting around to that. And,
No.
you know, the point is that whether I like it, you know, I tend to like it as opposed to being other things.
Sure.
I'm an American. You know, that's very pointedly clear anytime I go to Europe or somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Then you'll figure out that you're a kind of different entity. So you can't really change that. There's absolutely no reason to be ashamed about it or apologetic about it any more than there is anything else. At the same point, you don't have to be obsessively cocky about it.
Well, it's very much in the same way that, as I've said with you before, I am Catholic. They have done some horrible things, like from the Crusades on, to the telling people that if you say the world is round, you're excommunicated or burned at the stake, you know, or considered a witch. Like the atrocities of the Malleus Maleficarum to begin with, and what it led to, and its authorship by Boniface. Just it's crazy stuff, you know. But it's there, and it can't be denied, and you have to be willing to go, yes, that happened. Now what do we do about it? Now how do we move forward? Even the church at some point came forth and made public apology for the Crusades, you know. And at some point we have to come forth and go, oh yeah, you know, like we're sorry about all the horrible things we've done as America. And like you were saying, with Gulf of Tonkin, typically
I have
we just
to admit, I
sweep
have a kind of issue with you know, post facto apologies for
sure.
You know, it's like, well, we're sorry we dropped the bomb in Hiroshima. Okay,
Yeah.
that was well.
I wasn't even around. I don't know.
Are you? I don't know. I mean, you know, considering that the people who are apologizing aren't the people who did. I think one of the problems, and you can connect to the thing, is to believe that history is somehow hereditary.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
That you know, I don't see myself as having any connection to things that I didn't do. Okay, I'm responsible for the things that I did do. I'm not responsible for things that were done before by people who were my relatives or someone else who belonged to my tribe or whatever years before.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost in some ways like, you know, this is a weird thing for an historian to say. I don't know whether I brought it up in your show or not, but I have occasionally had the feeling that that the study of history does a disservice by simply keeping things in people's minds that maybe in some cases just really ought to be forgotten.
Yeah, just let it roll. Just let it go.
There is a you know, it's one of the reasons why the ancient Greeks, whatever else they were for, argue that in some cases one of the most blessed things that the gods could grant a mortal was forgetfulness.
Yes.
Was to simply erase from their mind. And you know, there's a balance in that, but it's history is one of those things that affects us, but it isn't necessarily something that we had any particular part in.
Yeah.
You still there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay, yeah. There was a beep on the end of my phone.
Oh, sorry.
I think it's a matter that, I mean, you can go through American history, you can go through any history, and you can find just a constant, you know, there's a litany of atrocities and mistakes that were made.
Sure.
I'm not going to go into the whole, you know, the whole issue of the relationship between the American Republic and Native American populations, but you know, I think we'd all pretty much admit that was poorly handled. Okay.
Yeah.
It was just
that is the most diplomatic way
folks. There was plenty of room
to put that.
Yeah. And all you had to do was to establish some sort of a deals and establish basic, you know, property rights. And the simplest thing you could have done was to make Native Americans actually citizens of the Republic instead of treating them like foreigners, resident foreigners within the country.
Yeah.
which is what was done.
Yep.
But anyway, you can't undo what has happened in that case. It's not a matter of trying to. Nothing is perfect, but it doesn't mean that you can't try to make it better. All right.
Sure.
And I think there's those and to sort of acknowledge those things, but to sort of apologize for it. I mean, that's to me that's a stunt.
Sure.
All right. Maybe I'm taking too, but
no.
It's a kind of stunt that makes everybody feel good because you're apologizing for something that really you don't feel any responsibility for.
No.
The people who weren't directly affected by it, so we can all feel better about it. But it doesn't change anything.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah. And very well said. Very well said. Doctor, thank you so much for your time. I don't want to keep you any longer. It's been a great conversation and really getting into the way that, like we were saying, it's really just a dialogue that is pushed. It's a broken monopoly. You know, it's kind of what they did to Ma Bell. It's a fractured monopoly, you know. Our political system that we currently live in. It's a monopoly that's been split in two so that you got two sides of a coin. We can flip it and see what happens, but the greater machine is still in charge.
Well, you can always argue it's a self-perpetuating criminal conspiracy that really ought to be prosecuted under the RICO Act. But at any rate...
that is my poll quote for this episode.
That's my non-binding. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that's a possibility to consider.
Hey.
But it is a system, and it is a system which runs the country and therefore to a certain degree runs you.
Yep.
So everybody ought to be wise to that and act accordingly.
And, like we say all the time on this show, folks, life is that Fight Club rule. It's that Operation Chaos. Like, you choose your level of involvement. You choose whether or not you absorb these things that way. You choose the filter through which you read the news. You choose the filter through which you process the datum that is given to you. So, Doctor, please do hold the line while we close things out. Make sure to stop on by and check out the real history of secret societies on great courses. You can find great courses on Amazon Prime if you're an Amazon Prime member. You can also find Dudes and Beer on Amazon now. We are on Amazon Podcasts as well as on Audible. So we have a free trial for you. You get 30 days free if you go to audibletrial.com/dudesandbeer. You will get 30 days of Audible free. You can check this out. There's all kinds of great audiobooks out there. While you're online checking that out, make sure to stop on by the Dudes and Beer store. That is where you can find your copies of Secret Agent 666, Wall Street and the Russian Revolution, as well as Trust No One, The Secret World of Sidney Riley, that our good friend Dr. Richard Spence was just discussing on air. So while you're online checking that out, make sure to check out HC Universal Network. That's our parent network. Tons of great stuff there. Scary Dad podcast, Yes But Why podcast, Talking Sound. If you got kids out there, folks, go check out Mega Selgar. It is a full-on audio drama that is for like preteens, teenagers, early adults. It is awesome. Great for long drives.
Thanks for listening.
Take care
to
of
this
yourselves. Take care of each other.
Dudes and Beer podcast.
Can't be good. Be good at it.
To listen to our audio streams or chat with us live, download the official Dudes and Beer app for Android and iDevices, available on Google Play and iTunes markets. For more episodes, content, and information, visit us online at dudesandbeer.com. You can also find our episodes on Breach.tv, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. Dudes and Beer is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. For more about our sponsors and other podcasts on this network, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, everybody, and until next time, drink responsibly.